What you're looking at right now are two 10-year-old boys. Two boys who coldly, deliberately, and methodically took the life of a 2-year-old child named James Bulger. Make no mistake, this isn't just scary. This is pure, unfiltered darkness. February 12th, 1993. Two friends, John Venables and Robert Thompson, were doing what thousands of other boys their age were doing that day. They were skipping school. It happens. The two of them headed to a place called the Strand, a small shopping center in the town of Bootle, just outside of Liverpool. And once they got there, they were doing anything but what normal kids do. They were shoplifting a couple of batteries, a doll, and a can of blue paint. At some point during that trip, they tried to lead a 2-year-old boy away from the mall, with the darkest intentions. That attempt failed. Thank God. But the other one didn't. Because failing the first time didn't stop these two. Not even close. That same day, they found another victim. That afternoon, a woman named James Bulger was also at that very same shopping center, with her 2-year-old son, James. Now, James was 2 years old, and most of the time on outings like this, he rode in a stroller. But on this particular day, his mom had decided to leave the stroller at home. That decision would haunt Denise for many, many years to come. Mother and son walked into a butcher shop just to pick up some meat. Nothing unusual. She found what she needed, walked up to the register, and turned away from James for just a few seconds. Long enough to pay. When she turned back around, James was gone. We're talking literal seconds. She turned. She paid. She turned back. Gone. Denise immediately panicked and ran out of the shop, turning left to search. She started running, stopping people, asking anyone she could find. Did anyone see anything? My child is missing. There are so many what-ifs that have haunted this woman for decades. But perhaps the biggest one, the one that never leaves, is this. What if she had turned right instead of left? Would her son be alive today? Possibly. She later said, "I turned away for 1 second, and I never saw my little boy alive again." Because the reason James disappeared, as you may have already guessed, was John Venables and Robert Thompson. They had taken little James by the hand and walked him out of that butcher shop, turned right. His mother went left. Denise found a security guard and frantically described her son, what he looked like, what he was wearing, the color of his hair. Within minutes, an announcement was going out over the mall's loudspeakers. But nobody had seen anything. Nobody knew anything. Just despair. So she called the police. By then, James was already outside the mall with his abductors. The two boys would later admit that James cried the entire time. He kept calling for his mom, over and over. They didn't react. They just kept walking, taking him exactly where they planned to go. Now, here's the question everyone asks. Did anyone see these 3 kids together? About 38 people did. 38 people witnessed 2 10-year-old boys leading a toddler through the streets. Did anyone do anything? No, not one person. And look, I know that outrages people at first. It outrages me too. But here's the thing. Honestly, put yourself in their position. If you saw 3 kids on the street, would your first thought be kidnapping and murder? Or would you think, older brothers walking a cranky little sibling home? A 2-year-old crying and tugging at someone's hand doesn't exactly scream abduction when the people holding that hand are also children. Still, what happened next? At one point near a ditch, the 2 boys picked James up and threw him headfirst onto the ground below. A woman walking nearby saw it happen. She kept walking. James had bruises and deep cuts on his forehead. The boys pulled his hood up over his head to hide the injuries. We know all of this because more witnesses saw them. Some even noticed the wounds on James's head. According to their own statements, they didn't think much of it. They assumed the kids were just playing around, and the little one had fallen. Happens all the time with little kids, right? Later, the boys even brought James to one of Liverpool's busier streets. Plenty of people saw them there too. In fact, one woman, watching from her window, saw Robert Thompson kick James in the ribs. Hard. Because James kept crying and calling for his mom. That wasn't kids playing. That was violence, right in front of her. What did she do? She closed the curtains so she didn't have to watch anymore. Years later, she said,
I saw them. I heard the baby crying. I looked right at them. My God, I looked right at them. And now I have to look out that same window every single day. Every day I see those children in front of me. When I go to sleep at night, I see them again.
Little James came this close to being saved. Twice. The first time, 2 women stopped the group because something seemed off. They asked, "What happened? Where are you coming from? Where are you going?" The 2 boys switched on something almost disturbing. A perfect performance of childhood innocence mixed with cold, deliberate calculation. They claimed they'd just found this little boy nearby, already looking like that. Didn't know anything. Didn't hear anything. Just picked him up somewhere that seemed dangerous and were trying to help. One of the women said they should all walk James to the nearest police station, that someone was definitely looking for him. The boys politely agreed. What a great idea. Absolutely, they'd do that. The women walked away, but one of them wasn't fully convinced. Something was nagging at her. She was actually about to go back and help the boys get to the station herself, until the other woman told her she'd seen James smiling and laughing just a few minutes earlier. That he seemed completely fine. Somehow, the battered face of a 2-year-old was enough to be dismissed and forgotten. So the women walked on. Later, when the news of James Bulger's disappearance was everywhere, that same woman saw it and immediately called the police with everything she knew. It wasn't much, but she called. If only she had trusted her gut about those 2 10-year-old boys. A second woman also almost stopped what was coming. She approached the group too, asked what happened, but then went a step further. She said she would personally take James to the police station herself. Here's the catch. She had her own child with her, and for some reason that became a complication. She turned to another nearby woman and asked if she could watch her child while she walked James to the station, instead of simply bringing both children along. I genuinely don't understand why both kids couldn't just go together. Either way, the second woman refused. Something about her dog not liking children. While the 2 women worked out what to do, John, Robert, and James vanished from sight. The boys eventually reached an abandoned stretch of railway tracks, and from that point on, what happened was not a quick, accidental death. It was deliberate. It was prolonged. It was horrifying. They poured the blue paint, the same paint stolen from the shopping center, directly into James's eyes. They kicked him. They punched him. They hurled rocks at him. They pushed batteries into his mouth, the same batteries they'd stolen that morning. They found a metal bar. They used it. By the end, James had 10 skull fractures, 42 separate injuries on his body in total. The injuries were so severe and so numerous that investigators struggled to determine which single blow had actually killed him. The boys also wanted to make it look like an accident. They wanted it to look like a train had hit him, or run over him. So they left James on the railway tracks, in a horrific state, and simply walked away. A train did come. James's body was severed in half. Investigators later determined that James was already dead by the time the train struck him, His body was discovered 2 days later, on February 14th, by 4 children playing on the tracks. One more detail, and this one matters. James's shoes, socks, pants, and even his underwear had been removed. An assault of a deeply physical nature was suspected. It was never officially confirmed. But stay with me until the end of this story, because there's a detail connected to this that will come up again. Initially, police suspected the parents, but very quickly, thanks to CCTV footage from the shopping center, it became clear that 2 seemingly ordinary 10-year-old boys were responsible. When James's father first saw the grainy footage, he turned to his wife and said, "He'll be okay. He's with 2 kids. What could possibly go wrong?" The break in the case came when a woman saw enhanced images of the 2 boys from the CCTV footage. She recognized John immediately, and she knew he'd been skipping school that day with his friend Robert. She called police. The boys were arrested and interrogated. Were the investigators shocked? Absolutely. More than they ever expected to be. They had suspected someone young was behind this, but they were thinking 14, 15, 16 years old, not 10. They could barely believe what they were hearing. The following is a recreation of a portion of the actual interrogation.
What time was it when it happened?
I don't know.
So what happened?
I don't know. He took the baby and just walked around the store and then let him go. And then when we were near the church, he let the baby go.
When the investigator turned his attention to the other boy.
And you, John? You shook your head?
Yeah, I told him to take the baby back.
You said to take him back?
I told him to take the baby back.
You told him to return him?
Don't put all the blame on me.
We're just asking. We're not trying to blame anyone. Calm down, okay? You all right?
Yeah.
On
a different occasion.
He said that you were both in the shopping area and you saw the little boy.
We never. Do you swear to God? I swear to God, we never.
He said he was scared. He said you took the boy by the hand and walked him out of the shop.
That's not true. He's lying.
Calm down. It's okay. Stop it. Come on. It's okay.
I didn't touch the boy. I didn't kill him, Mum. He started throwing bricks at him.
Why was he throwing bricks at him? Did it make him fall?
No. I mean...
You're saying he threw a brick at his face and he fell, but he kept getting back up.
Yeah, he kept falling and getting back up again. He didn't want to stay down.
And what was he saying when he threw the bricks?
He was saying, "Stay down."
Why did he want him to stay down?
I don't know. So he'd be dead, I guess.
Why are you telling us this?
Because I didn't kill him. Mom, let's go.
Just tell them the truth, and this will be over in a few minutes.
He hit him in the face. I don't know.
Okay, stop. We're getting close, aren't we? We're getting to the truth.
But now I'm going to get another charge.
As the investigation moved forward, the physical evidence against them piled up. The same blue paint found on James's body was found on their clothing. Traces of blood were found on their shoes. It was James's blood, and a shoe print found on James's head matched Robert Thompson's shoe. The 2 boys were interviewed separately, and each one blamed the other. Best friends. But eventually, John Venables confessed fully to what he had done. He asked the investigators to tell James's mother that he was very, very sorry. Robert Thompson, meanwhile, kept denying everything, any involvement, any knowledge, right up until he slipped. He described in precise detail exactly what James was wearing the day he disappeared. On February 20th, 1993, both boys were formally charged with murder. From that point on, they were held in custody. The trial wouldn't begin for another 9 months, and in the meantime, the city erupted. The country erupted. People demanded justice. They were furious, beyond furious. The rage had no ceiling. During the trial, the boys were referred to only as Child A and Child B. They would later be given entirely new identities. They were held in secure facilities with heavy protection, specifically to prevent vigilante attacks. Their parents were also relocated to different parts of the country and given new names because of constant credible death threats from the public. The protests were, to put it mildly, massive and extremely loud. Because of their age, each boy sat in the courtroom on a specially raised chair. Otherwise, they literally would not have been visible over the barrier. They hadn't grown enough yet. The fact that Robert showed no emotional response whatsoever throughout the process led investigators to believe he was the primary instigator. John was considered the more led one. A forensic psychiatrist evaluated both boys and concluded neither was a sociopath, and neither had any diagnosable mental disorder. In other words, they fully understood what they were doing. They knew the difference between right and wrong. As for why they did it, the investigation never firmly established a motive. The forensic psychiatrist offered his own theory. The boys were testing the limits of authority, the limits of what they were allowed to do. Whatever the reason, both boys were sentenced to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure, an indefinite sentence, with the possibility of release after 8 years. The judge, in delivering the sentence, said, "It was a fact of unparalleled, motiveless evil." In this case, that evil came in the form of two 10-year-old boys. 8 years passed. Both boys underwent further evaluation. Since their behavior while in custody had been considered acceptable, they were released on parole. Where are they now? That's a complicated question. John Venables, the one identified during the investigation as the more passive of the two, was arrested again in 2010 and sent back to prison. This time, he was sent back to prison for possessing and distributing highly prohibited, illicit digital materials of the most unforgivable nature. I won't go into specifics for reasons that should be obvious, and also because YouTube would pull this video immediately. John had been under constant supervision since his release, yet he still managed to distribute 57 images of unforgivable, severe offenses involving children through the internet. He was caught in the act of trying to destroy the hard drive containing all of it. He later admitted to harboring illicit and deeply disturbing desires toward minors. He was also drinking heavily and using drugs throughout this period. In 2018, he was arrested again. Same category of offenses, different material, same content. Despite James's mother's relentless campaign to ensure John Venables would never walk free again, he was released once more. However, his freedom didn't last. For years, John fought to keep his liberty. But in late 2023, his bid for parole was officially denied. A panel ruled he remained an outstanding threat to society, citing his ongoing, dark obsessions. As of 2026, he remains locked away in a UK high-security prison. At one point, past speculation placed him in either Australia or New Zealand. It's hard to confirm, since he has been given new identities multiple times. Though John has reportedly revealed his true identity to people he chose to trust, which is part of how we know as much as we do about his life after his first release, and which is also why his identity had to be changed more than once. As for Robert Thompson, almost nothing is known. The prevailing belief is that he never left the country, has not been caught committing any further crimes, and may not have committed any. After release, both men were legally prohibited from ever contacting or communicating with each other again.